FinTechTalk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
I'm your host, Charles Orton-Jones. Today, we're looking at cybersecurity. The threat from cyber attacks has never been greater. We've seen the rise of ransomware, of state-sponsored attacks, and now we've seen the emergence of AI-assisted attacks. What can be done, and in particular, what can be done to protect banks with legacy systems? To find out, as ever, we have assembled a world-class panel. So without further ado, let's meet our experts. We have David Cartwright of Santander Bank. David, what a pleasure to see you here. Perhaps you could just tell our audience something about yourself.
Afternoon, Charles. Lovely to be here. Yeah, so my name's Dave Cartwright. I live on a sunny Channel Island called Jersey, and I'm Chief Information Security Officer for that part of Santander, the outside the ring fence bit, effectively, of the British business.
And I should give your grand title of you are Chief Information Security Officer, so you are the head honcho.
Indeed.
Fantastic. And joining us also, we have Steve Gillam of Metro Bank. Steve is a cybersecurity specialist with many, many years of experience of the industry. So Steve, wonderful to see you again. Perhaps you just tell us something about yourself.
Hi, Charles. I've been in the cybersecurity industry for 17 years, but before that I've been in IT all my life. I've worked at Santander for a few years, mainly in the finance side on other banks as well, Bank of Tokyo, Phillips and Drew, Credit Lyonnais, Credit Agricole, and I had a short stint at an airline as well.
Oh, fantastic. And perhaps we could just pull up the news story. We like to begin with a news story, and we found one that absolutely illustrates this. We have an article just exploring the cyber threat to legacy systems. There's a lovely figure in here saying that 74% of banking executives believes that cyber attacks is the greatest threat to their business. David, does that sound about right?
Well, yeah, not just banks. So if you look at the average business, they probably 9 times out of 10 say that cyber attack is the biggest threat on their business. So it's nothing unique to that industry.
Fantastic. And Steve, so we're not underestimating this, Steve. I mean, we're not overhyping this. The threat from cyber is huge, omnipresent, potentially catastrophic.
It certainly is, and it's growing every day, really, because it's a lot easier to attack a bank than running into an actual building and trying to hold it up with guns. You can do it from the other side of the world, so and you're less likely to get caught as well. So there's more people doing it.
This is absolutely spot on. And let's just deal with this premise. Legacy systems. I'm hoping people listening and watching to this, I'm assuming many of them will work for banks with legacy systems. Just draw up this distinction for us, maybe, Steve. How much more vulnerable are legacy systems compared to more modern systems?
They're a big risk to the business because there's no security patches for them. The longer they're out there, you're going to get more vulnerabilities for it with no ability to patch it because it's no longer supported. Also, if the system just breaks, and it's not a vulnerability or anything, it just breaks, you've got no support at all. And the business has to try and work out what to do. And some of those systems will fail catastrophically, and you're going to need to be able to support that.
And just when we talk about legacy, I mean, I know Metro Bank and Santander have pretty modern stacks, but let's just be rude about other banks. When we say legacy, how old are some of these systems, Steve?
Well, it doesn't have to be that old. I mean, if you take, say, Windows 7 or that type of operating system, you still find businesses using those. A lot of ATMs still use Windows 7 behind the scenes. So they're a big risk, and those vulnerabilities need to be fixed, or moved to an operating system where you can support it. I mean, luckily enough, all the ATMs are all firewalled off. But it doesn't stop someone from, if they could hijack one of the machines and get onto that network, then they could go through all the ATMs in one go.
Fantastic. And David, I see you're just on mute, but let me just ask you the question. Legacy systems, is it a respectable view to say they're more vulnerable than modern systems?
Oh, absolutely. The problem is that when you look at the real legacy stuff, which was designed in even the 60s and 70s, although the physical systems may be reasonably modern, excuse me, because they've upgraded the hardware over time, they've generally not re-architected the whole thing from the ground up. So what you've effectively done is perpetuate the life of something which, through no fault of anyone's, is by nature going to be less secure than something run up by the much newer banks like the one that Steve has the delight of working for, who've been able to start in the era when security was the first thing that you think of. That wasn't the case back in the day, so you're always going to be running to catch up if you are using such a legacy kit. Even if it is physically relatively new, the underlying elements may well be a little non-contemporary.
I'm so pleased to have you two on here, because I know that you're not afraid of telling it like it is and being a bit rude if necessary. I mean, let's just talk about whether this is well understood at very senior levels. I mean, do you believe, David, that the cyber threat, especially the vulnerability of legacy systems, is properly understood by people making decisions at, well, not your bank, but a load of other banks?
Well, I think it is at mine. No, I think it is. That there is the classic conundrum of how the techies and the cyber guys explain stuff to the grown-ups at the top of the org chart. But I think in this day and age, they do get it, because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is an instance of business risk, and people running businesses, be they banks or otherwise, are perfectly familiar with the concept of risk. So legacy isn't necessarily a bad thing, because what's the alternative? Spend tens of millions to completely re-architect and have loads of downtime for the next 2 years. There's perfectly sensible reasons for sticking with it. What you need to do is to surface those risks and have the people at the top of the hierarchy accept them with whatever mitigation is required to make it within appetite.
Interesting. Steve, I know you've got strong views about this. I mean, the economics of preserving legacy systems, how do you see it? Because, as David says, it's extremely difficult upgrading. It is expensive. But what about maybe some of the hidden costs of trying to protect these legacy systems?
It certainly is a lot of hidden costs which people don't realize. So say if you had an operating system which goes out of the end of support, say Windows 2008, you might have 500 servers which need to be upgraded. There is ways of putting those behind firewalls, but you've got to do that with 500 servers, and each of those servers are doing different functions. So you have to set up different firewall rules for every single system. It's not simple as, well, I'm just going to get this system, put it behind a firewall, and it's nice and secure. It's just not like that in the real world. You're going to have to re-architect your whole environment to make it more secure, and that is a huge cost. So businesses need to plan well ahead of that software going end of life or operating system. It's like I was going to say, it's like an air. If you was like an airline, for example, and your engines go end of support with the actual manufacturer, are you going to be the person to say, I'm going to not upgrade these engines, I'm just going to fly with the old ones? And who's going to sign that risk off? It needs to be a top level C-level manager who's going to sign that risk off.
The thing I was just going to interject, apologies for talking over you, Steve, is as once you have firewalled all that stuff off, you've probably just made your management and maintenance task an order of magnitude harder. Yes. Because all of this stuff is segregated, and some poor devil's got to look after it. So you're probably going to end not just spending the money on doing it, but probably spending money on more bodies and more equipment to monitor it and ensure that it's doing what it needs to.
Yes, and that might be more than the actual just upgrading it to the latest operating system.
Because I was wondering whether we could just talk about which systems potentially are the most vulnerable. Banks have all sorts of different elements in the tech stack. Is there one area that you would think is, perhaps maybe unacceptable to have a legacy system? I mean, I'm thinking of some of the core stuff. Steve, what do you think? Is there some aspect of a banking stack that you would advise not being legacy for these reasons?
Well, not operating system, but more things like the middleware, things like Java, Tomcat, those type of legacy systems, which malware and ransomware uses all the time. If you don't upgrade your applications to use the modern applications, middleware applications, then you're going to get hit with ransomware. that's just one of those things.
David, what do you think? Is there some aspect that you think is where's the vulnerable underbelly, so to speak, of a bank when it comes to legacy systems?
Anything internet facing, simple as that. While you would probably be willing to live with an accepted risk of some legacy systems in the core, because to Steve's point, you can put layers of firewalls and other defenses between the world and the core. Anything internet facing absolutely has to be at the top of its game and as modern as you can possibly get it, and defended by stuff that's as modern as you can get it, because that's where the attack starts.
I would also add, though, to that, though, is that if you look at majority of breaches happens from a phishing email. So that person is now infected a workstation on your internal network. They can run from that machine on your internal network against any of your servers on your internal network. So you've got no firewalls protecting those.
Oh, absolutely. The other thing that we are, across the board, banks are starting to see more and more of is robotized account takeover attempts. Effectively, I mean, I'm sure we're going to be talking about machine learning and AI and automation later, but there's more and more people effectively roboting, trying to hammer online banking, particularly with fake credentials, or just trying to get into the front end or the middleware.
Well, let's just run with that now, because this has been the last 6 months of ChatGPT and the ability of machines to pass the Turing test and hold meaningful conversations with people that are often more intelligent than a conversation you could have with a human being. David, just tell us about the rise of these kind of AI-assisted, not just automated, but AI-assisted attacks.
I mean, AI really, in its current form, think of AI as really good automation. I much prefer machine learning to AI, because it's what it really is. It's using technology to take vast amounts of data, crunch it, do statistical analysis, and figure out what a human would take a fortnight to do in a couple of seconds. So it's really speeding up what a crowd of people could do. But that is the problem. Attacks are getting more and more easy to do and faster. So what you can do, what you could do in 2 weeks previously, you can now do in half an hour.
Gosh, and Steve, what are you seeing at Metro Bank? How do you assess the risk from AI and machine learning?
Well, we've blocked certain AI sites, but I don't think that's the answer, really, because it's even with all the problems AI and ChatGPT have got, businesses will go with it no matter whatever problems it is, and we'll just have to understand what those problems are going to be and try and educate the users on the use of it.
Yeah, ironically, one of the biggest threats, one of the things I am part of is the Channel Islands Information Security Forum, which is basically myself and all of my cyber peers across the Channel Islands. And the general view about the threat of ChatGPT is people uploading confidential data to it to say, please crunch these numbers for me, which, on the face of it, sounds a bit bonkers and a bit, well, you should know better. But I guess if you've not educated people to that, it's a novel concept, it's a new technology. And most people, apart from us, don't have a day job in cybersecurity and wouldn't necessarily think of that first. But there's a whole lot of very sensitive data getting uploaded to the cloud just now.
Gosh, and there will be. I mean, there are all sorts of services such as AIs that transcribe meeting notes, Excel plugins. So yes, gosh, there's a new wave of sort of AI-assisted tools that are entering the workplace, which have not yet been vetted.
Also, I think on ChatGPT, for example, people rely too much on the information coming back from it and don't realize that could be rogue information, and they're making judgments on the information they're getting back from this without validating it.
Yeah, and it is sometimes blatantly wrong.
Yes.
Yes, there's a lovely term, hallucitation. ChatGPT has invented some academic citation or invented statistics simply because it guesses the next word in the sequence, and why not throw in a word so it can mimic the real world highly effectively.
But also you can, from an attacker's point of view, you can use a technique called corpus poisoning, where you can feed in data which the ChatGPT is using to bring back incorrect or misleading information, because that happens now on like normal searches. If you do something like on Google and do a search for a particular subject, they try and filter all that information out, which sometimes people say, oh, they're censoring information. But then if you do the same on something like DuckDuckGo, where they don't validate that information, you can easily exploit that and push fake information into the search results. So you often find on DuckDuckGo, the information at the top is not always correct. It's just misinformation. It's because it's being abused, like the third parties abusing the search algorithm to get to the top, where Google is a bit more sensible about that and validates what it's doing.
Gosh, that's worth knowing. Because I just asked you about state actors. Now, I'm reluctant to sort of name names, but let me do so. I mean, the Russians we don't mind offending, but we have China, we have North Korea. How serious is the threat from, let's call them state-assisted actors? We see in Russia, there was the Revil Corporation, whose leader used to drive around in a sort of camouflage Lamborghini with the number plate Evil One or whatever it was. I mean, the Russian government for many years was clearly either assisting or deliberately ignoring these guys. David, how serious is the threat from state-assisted or enabled actors?
It's always going to be a threat. The problem is not necessarily in the banking industry or the finance industry. It's a threat across the board. If you look at any company who's got a threat management, threat monitoring team, you will always find the obvious names at the top, as state actors at the top of the tree. But one has to remember that there's a whole lot more people out there trying to get at you than the state actors. They will tend to be targeted against something. There's a lot more scattergun approaches. So, I mean, Steve mentioned phishing already. Yeah, ransomware is an obvious one. Yeah, you're probably going to be more under attack from the hundreds of thousands of scattergun attacks that are circulating the world at any time than to necessarily be unlucky and have one of the big states decide to pick on you. Sometimes you'll get an individual pick on you. I mean, there was a bank in the British Isles that was hit 3 or 4 years ago simply because a guy was looking around for a bank to hit and got a list of stuff and picked one because it sounded good. So that was one guy in Italy picked one bank in the British Isles, and that was just an unfortunate coincidence for that bank. But yes, state actors are always going to be there on the threat list, but among a whole lot of stuff that is also probably more likely to be having a go at you.
Okay, let's talk about the solutions. What can be done? I mean, let's try to talk through the options. I mean, Steve, the obvious first thing is maybe upgrading legacy systems, but what other options are there?
That's a tricky one because all of it costs money, and it's down to the business to decide how much they're going to spend on keeping their systems up to date. It depends on whether they've got a long-term vision for the business, or are they just short-term thinking to keep the budgets down while they're in tender until they move to another company, or they got a long-term vision to invest in new technology and move with the times. And that depends on the type of person you've got as your leaders.
Interesting. Can I ask you a question? Metro, to what degree is all your cyber stuff dealt with in-house? Because there are so many wonderful consultancies and third-party plugins, API cloud systems that can analyze even fraud detection to cyber attacks. What's the kind of balance between in-house and third-party providers at Metro?
We would have a third party as their main SOC, which does all the first line filtering of all, and then of all the alerts and stuff. So you get the economy of scale for that type. But then they feed it down to an on-site team who do all the context stuff around cyber internally.
Fantastic. And David, what's the Santander? Huge, wonderful organisation. What's the balance between doing it all in-house and talking to some of these wonderful startups?
Yeah, we're kind of the other way around. So because we are quite a big group, we have a lot of in-house services like that. So our cert, for instance, is sitting in Madrid and is an internal function, for instance.
Okay, fantastic. David, just talking through some of the other measures. We talk about upgrading legacy systems, but what programs can you introduce to harden your systems?
Well, I tend to be a bit of a cynic of buying loads of systems to defend yourself, because I've seen so many instances where organizations buy 10 things and use 10% of each of them and get zero value. I'm much more a believer in picking 2 or 3 and using them to the full. But actually, the first thing you have to do is understand the nature of the beast, to understand the risk. And I'm going to go all Rumsfeld on you now. But the worst thing you can possibly have in cybersecurity, financial or not, is unknown unknowns. And so the absolute key thing is to be able to see your risks properly and effectively and to measure them, because then you can say, right, here are the ones that we need to mitigate. Right, what packages, systems, people, third parties can we engage to mitigate those and bring them back within appetite?
So I'm assuming to do that, you must conduct some sort of audit. And is that an audit of the tech stack? I mean, how do you audit vulnerabilities? Because almost by definition, these are things probably overlooked.
Oh, absolutely. Finding actual vulnerabilities or known vulnerabilities particularly is relatively straightforward, because there's 101 organizations out there that will sell you vulnerability scanning services. Obviously, you can do regular penetration testing and all that fun stuff. Yeah. But a lot of the threat in any organization is failure to patch properly, failure to spot that something's misconfigured. And relatively inexpensive tools can help you a long way along the line to that. I do, over the years, I've seen a lot of people spend £250,000 on a new log analyzer when they could actually have spent a third of that on just getting some bodies or a third party or some software to do their patching properly, for instance.
Yeah, I totally.
How do we improve patching?
Well, automate most of it, and then and get the business to understand that servers need some maintenance window that you can patch those servers, because sometimes you find a business saying, well, we can't release this server for 3 months, it's running a critical process, we can't have any downtime, we have to schedule it in with lots of people, as opposed to building it resilient in the first place and allow machines to be shut down and another one brought up, so you've got time to patch it. But that's just poor design, really, in the initial stages. I was going to say, certainly automate as much as possible so you can then concentrate on the really important stuff.
Completely agree on automate. With automated attacks, you've got to automate defenses. But yeah, Steve's absolutely right. And again, if you go back to things that were designed back in the old days, unless you've modernized and said, we need to put a load balancer in front of this, we need 3 front-end web servers so that we can take one at a time down in order to patch it and not impact internet banking, for instance. It's relatively simple stuff, but unless you do it, you are always going to have some single point of failure somewhere and some downtime. Sometimes downtime's inevitable. Sometimes you do have to upgrade the core operating system on your platform. But if you can minimize it by a bit of sensible design or redesign, then all the better.
Fantastic. I just want to touch on the point of air gapping. Is air gapping something people still do? David, it sounds like a slightly medieval practice to me, but is it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Why wouldn't you?
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's if you want to stop someone getting into something, disconnect it from the world, or at the very least, a lot of the time when people talk about air-gapped backups, for instance, they're not really completely air-gapped, but what they are is using some different mechanism to get the data from the live storage onto the backup storage, so that you can't, say, infect the live storage with ransomware and have it replicated to the backup and obliterate it. But yeah, I'm sure there are businesses around there that have real air gaps. I was chatting to a friend who's looking to deal with something for a law firm in the UK who are absolutely paranoid about their data and getting ransomware. And I said, well, if they're really that paranoid, do a backup and unplug it at the end of the day.
Interesting. I know a great flour company that's in Northamptonshire, that one of the country's biggest, that everything is air gapped. And they may have some difficulty should they ever de-air gap some of their systems, because importing updates from the internet can be slightly difficult if you're a company with not great expertise. But that's interesting to hear you say that. Thank you so much. Yeah. We have a question from sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to throw one example in, a real world example. I was chatting to a guy who runs data centers for a fairly large company. And if the generator maintenance company wants to come and do maintenance or anything, they have to go on site, because he didn't buy the network cards for the generators because he didn't want them connected to anything. And so his generators are under no risk whatsoever of cyber attack.
The Russians can't get them. Fantastic. Yeah. Okay. We have a question from Jeff Sharp, one of our esteemed members of the audience, regarding vulnerable old Windows 7 run cores. How feasible are automated defenses? Steve, do you want to take this one? Automated defenses on Windows 7 possible?
Well, you could certainly automate certain things. You'd certainly need to take them off the domain, not have them on any domain, and have different credentials on every single box. So because once an attacker gets on one of the machines, they will just read all the credentials from that machine and then use it to log on to other machines. So you've got to make sure that every machine has got unique credentials. That's one of the problems, and then that becomes harder to manage. So you just have to tighten up all the login and be watching that like a hawk, really. And doing that just causes more time that you're going to spend looking at one machine as opposed to upgrading it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to your point earlier, Steve, put it behind a modern firewall. If you've got something old and chunky, then put something new and shiny in front of it.
Yeah, you're not going to have just one machine, though. That's the problem. You're going to have multiple machines running that OS.
Yeah, it does depend on the nature of the beast. I mean, not so long ago, I was in a private medical practice for an X-ray, and they fired up their Windows XP PC that drove the £1 million X-ray machine. So yeah, there you probably could justify a separate firewall, but yes, in the average case,
the problem with that is that you can isolate that off the machine, off the network, and have it air gapped. But then the doctor says, or the surgeon says, "Oh, I want to email that information. Can you connect it up to my system so I can email the information?" And then you've broken your segmentation.
Yep.
I wanted to ask about penetration testing. I think this is a wonderful career. I once interviewed the pen tester of the year, who'd been a roadie, spent his life as assisting musicians, and then retrained as a pen tester, and just thought it was the most wonderful career. He loved taking down systems in theory rather than actually doing it. But David, are pen testers part and parcel of your testing?
Yeah, absolutely. People are useful creatures because they can think a bit constructively and they can be sneaky. A good pen tester thinks like a sneaky attacker. But a pen tester will always be starting by using something to come and probe and see what gaps are there. Effectively, they will always use tools to probe and see what's there, and then will use their knowledge, experience, etc., guile, wit, cunning, to say, right, okay, of these 13 things it's found, which ones shall I explore? It's not a job I could ever do, because you have to keep so on top of your game. You probably spend, if you're any good, at least a third of your time learning all the new techniques and keeping up with the state of the art. But it's a very interesting discipline, because we've all come across pen testers who've come across a dozen issues. They've started to explore one and got down a rabbit hole and never looked at the other 11. So it is a very specialist role, and it's one that has a lot of talented people in the industry. One thing that is quite fun at the moment is organizations like BugCrowd, so crowdsourced pen testing almost. And that's an interesting one, because it means you're getting the brain power of more than one person doing the testing on the same system. I mean, it's not far afield from a bug bounty system, I guess, but it's an interesting concept, because it means you will get a lot of different individuals with different ideas looking at the same systems. But prior to all of that, there will be some electronic stuff going on to knock on the doors and find some of the chinks in the armor.
Is that something that Santander has been engaged in, crowdsourcing?
Oh, not yet. No, I personally haven't. I don't know if other parts of the group have.
Okay.
As I say, from my point of view, pen testers are useful for highlighting as a third party to highlight to the business to get something fixed, because a lot of the time they're using exactly the same tools that I use, or our business uses. We know that the machines are vulnerable, but the business doesn't want to think it's a high risk. So we have to get a pen tester in to reiterate from a third party point of view, to say this is what we found by exploiting those vulnerabilities that we already know that we've got. And like the management are more interested in taking like a view when a third party tells you that you're vulnerable, as opposed to someone internally tells you.
That is a really good point. I mean, that again, that's not just a banking thing. If particularly as a CISO of any organization, you'll probably be banging on about the same things month in, month out. As to Steve's point, I completely agree. If someone independent comes in and goes, guys, do you realise you got this problem? It's amazing how the execs sit up and take notice where you've been banging on for months.
Yeah, so it's a good way of getting things fixed, where before they've just been lower priority. You get a third party to force the issue to the management to get them to do it.
And it's very similar with things like security audits. So if you're certified to ISO 27001 or one of those, having an independent auditor confirming your suspicions that actually there's room for improvement here, that is often the gateway to getting some funding to fix something you've been trying to get at for a while.
So it sounds like there's an emerging theme here, which is the legacy system is often the staff, the humanware, that especially with stuff like even pen testing. I talked to, pen tester of the year, said if he was really given free rein, he would introduce phishing and social tests, and he might even turn up at the office and see if he couldn't just breeze through and have a chat with IT. He found it pressingly easy to bypass allegedly, secure banks' internal systems. Steve, is that about right? That probably the weakest link in here is the human beings.
It is not just from like a vulnerability side, but just misconfiguration of things. When there's some outage for whatever reason, people say, "Oh, just turn the firewall off, get it up and running," and then forget to turn it back on when certain rules back on once that instance finished. And it doesn't have to be a cyber issue; it could be just a business issue which has caused the problem. So it's usually like a human behind it, but isn't I wouldn't say the humans to blame. It's just one of those things which we have to deal with, one of those problems.
Yeah, I'm going to do the solidarity with the people thing here. People do make mistakes. However, systems are often developed and implemented such that they're not preventing people from making mistakes. So I once socially engineered a US telco to do some line moves because I didn't know the password to the account. And managed to get her to do it because she thought my English accent was really cool. Now, she made a mistake, but the mistake was that her system allowed her to make that mistake because it didn't stop her getting to our company's details without me giving all the correct credentials. And I do despair sometimes when the people get blamed, because yes, people do make mistakes, but we do tend to put them out there and make them more susceptible to the mistakes than we ought. One thing I will also say, to your point about breaking into stuff, if you Google how I used to rob banks by a guy called Freaky Clown, that is a fantastic 40-minute video. And it's staple viewing for cybersecurity people, but actually anyone on this talk will absolutely love it.
And give us a clue, how does he do it?
Oh, you name it. It's fair to say that there's a lot of poor physical security in a lot of companies. And
a good way is just walk in with a ladder and a bright yellow jacket. People, you just say, "I've got to go and fix that," because people won't stop, and they think you're official if you've got a ladder with you. There's people getting into places and football matches, and just by carrying a big ladder with them, and they obviously think they're just maintenance people.
Yeah. And this guy actually, someone held the door open for him to cart out a pile of PCs because he was struggling. So they held the door open for this poor IT guy who was having trouble doing it himself.
Fantastic. And I want to just ask you, if this isn't a nosy question, kind of what you guys are working on internally at the moment. I mean, you guys have a veil of confidentiality, but David, what's occupying your days at the moment, or what keeps you up at night?
Nothing really keeps me up at night. We have an ongoing program of cyber improvement. So we're rolling out, or we're attaching to the group's log management system, for instance. We've got a bunch of upgrades on the cards to avoid going legacy on servers. Lots of streams of parallel stuff, but pretty much what everybody else is doing, just keeping up with the times. Putting in a lot more monitoring. I'm a massive believer in visibility. Because until you've seen what your world looks like, you can't actually do anything about it. So one of the things that any sensible organization does is once a month or once a quarter will revalidate the access controls to their various applications. So for each app, for each user, you'll do a quarterly or monthly check to say, should this person still have access to this? So what a lot of businesses that I see are doing is taking that from a manual exercise. Now that we have things like Power BI, tools like that lend themselves brilliantly to doing stuff like the monthly and quarterly reviews, because you can just pull the data in automatically using robots. Again, automation. These days, packages like UiPath and similar are bread and butter to many people. And what used to be a highly manual task, you can now automate. In a previous life, we took a 6-month activity down to a fortnight simply by pulling the data into a database and rolling a Power BI over it. Why hadn't they done it before? Because Power BI didn't exist at the time. So that tends to be where we're heading. It's the A word, is automation.
Amazing. And Steve, I'll ask you the same question. What is it that you're working on at the moment? And I've a hunch you might be quite similar to David.
Very similar to David. Producing metrics, which are good metrics to highlight to the management. API security and container security is my big thing at the moment.
Fantastic. And just to ask you guys a bit of an unexpected left field question, today's modern systems are next year's legacy systems. I'm particularly interested in the emergence of quantum computing, having had the privilege of looking at some of the new quantum chip designs, trapped ion and silicon-based company called Quantum Motion coming out of Oxford University and Imperial London. But it does appear these chips are very close to becoming commercially available, at which point we look at stuff like quantum attacks, the ability to solve modern cryptography. Is this a threat that's on your radar, David? I mean, this was once theoretical, but is now almost practical. How does your bank see quantum attacks?
It's not something we're actively rushing to do, simply because we have enough to do at the moment. It's very much on the radar of something that is coming rumbling over the horizon quite quickly. What I would say is the general view across the industry, as in the cyber industry, not just the finance one, is yes, it's something to be concerned about, but not something to lose sleep about. The concept that quantum will come along and immediately crack all of our existing encryption algorithms is simply not the case. Is the way the mathematicians are putting it to us. So yes, it is something to be concerned about, but just like everything else that is to be concerned about, the automated attacks are of today, and something we need to look at today with an eye on quantum for tomorrow.
Steve, is quantum on your radar at all?
It isn't, but it should be. I mean, there's not quantum attacking on cryptography at the moment, but there will be in sort of 10 years' time, I would guess. So really, what we could do now is to start classifying what type of cryptography we're using and where it is. So we're ready for when we need to switch over. Because certain types, like symmetric cryptography, is not quantum computing is not going to hit that as badly as asymmetric encryption. I mean, with symmetric, you can just double the length and it wouldn't cause much of an issue. But with asymmetric, where quantum is going to attack, that's where the problem is. And we really just need to start doing an inventory of where we've got it, so we're prepared when new cryptography comes available, that we can suddenly switch that out.
And to use the concept that you touched on, Charles, that the concept of not remaining legacy. Just as one day someone was saying, SSL's not looking very secure, we ought to be looking to what's next. Oh, the answer is TLS. Similarly, we should now be saying, well, we're on TLS. Let's have an eye on what's coming next, because we are going to have to evolve towards it, and let's do so proactively, rather than when what we're using now suddenly becomes obsolete and everyone's a mad rush because it's suddenly decreed as insecure.
And that's a problem with legacy systems, because they just do not support like the latest TLS versions. So now you're going to have those on your network running the wrong protocols.
Gosh, you guys are a lot more relaxed about quantum than I am, but maybe I've swallowed the quantum hype. Having talked to some of the chip makers, they're very keen to tell you, no, quantum is here. Professor John Morton, who founded Quantum Motion, is probably the UK's leading expert in about 70 different papers on nanotechnology and quantum chip design tells me he expects it to be really within the next 5 years that you'll start to see stable qubits, chips running in parallel with the sort of power to really challenge prime-based encryption.
I was going to say, probably like a lot of the governments are probably sweeping up all that data now, even though they can't break it. So in the future, they can just break it once they've got the quantum computing to do it. So
yeah, we saw with the emergence of AI, when it happened very, very fast with conversational LLM AIs. The emergence really was shockingly fast. So yeah, it's something I'm paying attention to. I was just curious to see whether or not it was on your radars. And perhaps we could just end by talking. I'd like to close with a punchy question, which is really what trend you would like to see in cybersecurity. Steve, is there a particular trend or a recommendation you'd like to make to our viewers?
Just explaining cybersecurity really to the business and to make them be responsible for it. So, get their approval, so we explain it to them and they sign off the risk. Because at the moment, I believe, I've seen lots of companies just say, oh, security can risk accept that. And it's not really a security issue, it's more a business issue. And it needs to be done at the C level, not like some middle manager level.
And David, same question. Is there a trend you recommend people research, or some sort of other recommendation you'd like to make for our viewers?
More a trend I'd like to see. I mean, Steve just touched on it in his last sentence, actually. And I was a bit surprised. I was reading the other day that a surprising number of organizations are now starting to treat the CISO, like what I am, as more of an executive or even board role. I have worked for companies where senior members of the board happen to be, they weren't there because they were cyber experts, but they did happen to be extremely clued up in cyber. And my goodness, it made a difference. So the trend I would like to see is for the CISO to be as respected and senior and powerful, is probably the wrong word, authoritative, as the CFO saying. The CFO is always on the board. The CIO sometimes is. Chief Risk Officer increasingly tends to be. Given that CISO and Chief Risk Officer are largely the same thing, albeit that in my role you tend to be a bit more techie. My role is one of risk with techie stuff attached. My preferred trend would be to see roles like mine move upwards in the org chart.
Well, fantastic. I think anyone working in the cyber industry will be in full agreement with you, Dan. I think the word powerful is the right word first time. So David and Steve, thank you so much for your expertise. I personally am hugely indebted for that walkthrough of those cyber issues, because they are so important, so complicated, and it's so useful for all of us to have your long expertise shared with us so clearly. So thank you very much. To our viewers, next week, Tuesday, 4 p.m. UK time, we're discussing overhauling systems to combat financial crime. It's a great subject, and we've got an amazing panel for you. So I hope you can join us then. But for today, from Steve, David, and myself, thank you very much. Goodbye.